Good morning. I am here today to drink some coffee and to tell you about it. What I'm going to be making is a pumpkin spice latte. First, espresso. Milk that has been infused with pumpkin spice latte flavor. That heats it and makes it frothy. I'm gonna put this back in the fridge. Third ingredient we're gonna need: pumpkin pie spice. Okay. If we know anything about fall, it's that fall is the season in the United States. Fall is the season for the pumpkin spice latte. Pumpkin spice latte. What do we know about this food item? What comes to mind when you think pumpkin spice latte? You might be thinking, oh, cozy flannel, or you might be thinking Starbucks. That's like off the basic menu from Starbucks, or that's kind of bougie, and I have disdain for the bougie things. Okay. Well, there's been a lot written about how different foods kind of get lumped into different categories of like gendered foods, like feminized foods or more masculine foods. And the pumpkin spice latte has gotten itself a firm association as a gender identifying girl food, okay? So if you're calling it basic, you're sticking with the gender part. If you're calling it bougie, you're talking about bourgeoisie. That's the extension of bougie. Frantz Fanon, one of the best writers we've ever had, allow me a quote. "We know what makes a bourgeoisie is not its attitude, taste, or manners. It is not even its aspirations. The bourgeoisie is above all the direct product of precise economic realities." So I'm not here to say, like, if you choose to order a pumpkin spice latte that, like, I couldn't help myself, I was socialized to do it. But also a little bit, yeah, that's also kind of true, right? We make choices in our environment based on the knowledge that we gain about our environment. Okay, this is looking ready. Hey. Ooh, look at that, yeah. Step 3. Perfect. I'm just gonna let this sit for a minute because it's a little warm. So over the weekend, I happened to read this book, Members Only. This This book had me screaming at the narrator, screaming, screaming. It's about a professor who gets himself in some trouble, and there's a lot of different trouble that he gets himself into. One of the interesting troubles that he gets himself into is after giving a lecture on Edward Said's concept of Orientalism, the too long didn't read version. It's the idea that throughout the history of recorded history, the West has gone to the exotic East to find things that they can bring back to enrich life in the West. And it's often been a really one-sided relationship, right? The West hasn't really gone and done a lot to like make things great through colonialism, right? So that's what this book talks about. And it talks about how there's a gendered component in colonial situations that we need to understand, and basically everything we're talking about, intersectionality, those are all things we need to configure when we're thinking about how to understand post-colonial, so after colonial situations. What does this have to do with a pumpkin spice latte? Well, allow me a minute on the history of tea. So a lot of us think of tea as like, oh, British tea, high tea, Downton Abbey tea, Mr. Bean tea. I don't know, Mr. Bean. And we know that tea did not originate in England. That's like not what happened. It was brought back to the United Kingdom and lots of other places through a lot of colonialism and empire. So now, let's talk about chai tea lattes for just a quick second. Chai means tea. So when you're saying chai tea latte, you're saying tea latte. Okay? We can say chai for when we're talking about that kind of tea. It's not chai tea, it's just chai. So the kind of chai I'm talking about that we get in the flavor profiles for a chai tea latte, this is almost the exact same flavor profile and composition as pumpkin spice or the pumpkin spice latte. Allow me to read. Ingredients: cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and allspice, which I don't have, but there's some in my caps of spices. Okay, so those 4 primary ingredients. Now, Bengal spice tea from Celestial Seasonings. Ingredients: cinnamon, roasted chicory, natural spice, and vanilla flavors with other natural flavors: ginger, cardamom, black pepper, cloves, and nutmeg. Okay, so really similar in that they're made of warm spices. Just that smell that we have associated with fall, because these are saved in American cooking for kind of the sweeter dishes, right? Like pumpkin pie. But if we look at the history of what humans did with spices prior to colonization, these spices were not saved for sweet foods, but they are quite common for cooking meat, right? If you ever want to do something amazing, if you're gonna like make tacos with ground beef, instead of adding taco seasoning, add garlic and a little bit of pumpkin pie spice. You'll get that flavor of, this kind of tastes like a gyro, or this kind of tastes like shawarma, right? Because of this flavor profile. I can't take it anymore. I'm gonna try it. I'll have like a few more of those today before I get into grading. So why talk about this at this point in seasonality? Well, pumpkin spice, it had a moment and now it's having a problem. It's become so ubiquitous as a bougie basic food that it needs a little bit of rebranding. Like, you're missing out on part of the consumer market if you're only able to market to women, because there's a demographic that isn't going to want to buy that product that you're selling. So I predict, and keep your eye on this, I predict that the turmeric latte, or the golden latte, I predict that this is going to take steps into trying to get that foothold of the pumpkin spice latte empire. Why? Well, it's got most of the same ingredients. The only thing that's really different between here and here is turmeric, okay? And the difference in marketing this, okay? Cute little tiger, happy little flowers, right? Keeps us in a nice, safe, happy frame of mind that we have now associated with the gendered pumpkin spice latte that we've appropriated from chai. But with turmeric tea, this is still gender free. A gender has not claimed this as like, I'm gonna wear my Uggs and get my turmeric latte, or I'm gonna spray some Axe and then get my turmeric latte. This is still a site that hasn't been all marked up yet. Like, look at this packaging. This is just pure energy. This is pure possibility. The rhetoric visually here is that this is just, it's like the sun, and the sun is for everybody, right? The sun is for everybody. That's how I grow my amazing tomatoes that are rolling all over the place, right? Because of the sun. The sun is for everybody, and the sun is vital. So I predict that as being a marketing shift, but we'll have to wait and see. So again, why does this matter? Always keep asking, why do these things matter? This is one way that we can help understand the ideas that Wendell Berry is giving us in The Pleasures of Eating. He's not saying, oh, well, you know, because I grew this tomato, I grew this tomato and I know the soil that it lived in and the hands that cultivated it and the dog that tried to steal it. That's not the pleasure that he's talking about. He's talking about the connection between knowledge and pleasure. That's what gives us pleasure in eating. So this is a quote from page 149 in that text. Eaters, that is, must understand that eating takes place inescapably in the world, that it is inescapably an agricultural act, and that how we eat determines, to a considerable extent, how the world is used. How we eat determines how the world is used. So if you've ever heard the saying, like, vote with your dollar or vote with your fork, those are sayings that are asking us to engage as consumers with our money. Like, if we want to see change, buy reusable products as opposed to single-use plastic, right? Make those choices. Be a responsible, ethical, sustainable consumer. But this is an equity issue because those things are expensive. It's expensive to live a life that fully incorporates one's ethics and values if one is trying to do good things. So like if you've seen the show The Good Place, they talk about this as part of the quandary of what is human existence supposed to be. How do humans do it? It's physically hard to make good choices sometimes. Well, eaters, that is, must understand that eating takes place inescapably in the world, that it is inescapably an agricultural act, and that how we eat determines to a considerable extent how the world is used. If you think about the history of colonialism and the spice trade, there's a little bit of a joke that, you know, Columbus found America because he got lost trying to find spices. Okay? Spices have been incredibly important to community development and human development and colonialism and how all those things go together since the beginning of our recorded history, right? Spices matter. Spices matter. They define if we want to call somebody bougie for a drink that they're having. They define whether or not something is cultural appropriation, right? These things, they're cultural appropriation. So in choosing, as we did hundreds of years ago, and also continually in the choices that we make choices that aren't the same as I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna plant a tree, or I'm gonna harvest some really funny looking tomatoes. Why is this? Why is this like this? Ah, blossom rot. The choices that we make when we engage with food, these choices help shape the world, not only in terms of social relations, but also in terms of ecological, geological, sustainable ways of thinking, right? So as you're moving into finding your resources for how you want to think about your food items and your place items, like if you were talking about the pumpkin spice latte, do you want to talk about a cafe that reminds you about having one of these? Do you want to talk about an origin of something that it's connected to? Do you want to talk about how a component of it developed? Do you want to talk about just the history of cinnamon? Do you want to talk about where the cinnamon trees came from? Yes, cinnamon comes from trees. Cinnamon is amazing. Do you want to talk about other bigger histories about the spice trade? Do you want to talk about dairy farms? Do you want to talk about locations that are in terms of time, so historical, or in terms of place, as in this was packaged in Virginia? Okay, so this was packaged in Virginia. Figure out the places that make sense for the item that you might be talking about if you are talking about an item from Vinegar and Char. There's lots of places that are mentioned quite literally, as in this thing is happening in North Carolina, but you can find places in the food items that we have. Even if something just seems like it's a regular old American pumpkin spice latte, right? And we've got that phrase, as American as apple pie, which uses the same seasonings as pumpkin spice latte, okay? So if you're using if you're using something that seems like it's a completely culturally transparent food item, just look into a little more. Just look a little more. So the point of all this is not for me to convince you not to call a pumpkin spice latte bougie. Like, it is. It doesn't really matter that it is. It just is. But, like, you don't have to necessarily get down on people for liking things either. So the point of all this, just ask about food items, like internally. Ask yourselves, how is this food item that I am consuming, how does this contribute to the way that the world works? All right, that's what Barry is saying is going to give us pleasure, that when we interact with our food, we know that it is contributing to the value systems and the beliefs that we want to embody in living our lives. And he thinks that should be a right, that it shouldn't be something that only people with money or access can do. He defines pleasure as everyone should be able to make choices that reflect their beliefs and reflect their beliefs in a way that contributes to taking care of the earth, because that's where all of our food comes from. Okay, so that's why these choices are indeed agricultural choices and agricultural acts. So I invite you to think about that as the definition for pleasure as we are thinking about other sites that we locate of pleasure in texts. Okay, so is pleasure here represented as a way of being in the world that represents your beliefs, right? I like that idea. That idea gives me pleasure, right? The idea of making choices that reflect how I want the world to be and making choices that reflect my belief system. Okay? And he doesn't mean religious beliefs. He just means beliefs about right and wrong, not belief with a religious figure attached to it. All right, that's all I got.